Hey everybody, how's it going? So I was going to do a short episode about Graham Hancock's recent Netflix series, Ancient Apocalypse, and sort of some final concluding thoughts about it. I've been a fan of Graham's since 1995, so we're getting close to 30 years that I've been following Graham, and have read, well, most if not all of his books, including The Mars Mystery, which was a little interesting, I thought. Interesting project, but not overly convincing, but was definitely more convinced by some of his other books. But basically, I wanted to do this episode about my overall impressions of Graham's work and the response that he has received, especially lately, with this Netflix series. So, as the title of the video suggests, I think it's very possible that Graham is wrong in a certain sense. I think that he brings a lot of speculation into various elements of what he's talking about that could be entirely wrong. And I'm certainly prepared to accept that. As a fan of his, won't stop me from watching him on podcasts and, on YouTube, won't stop me from buying his books and being fascinated with what he has to say. But I'm perfectly willing to accept and agree that with many that he's probably actually not right about his overall, especially when he gets into the details about what he's talking about. But I do think, on the other hand, and the reason I say that is because of the question of evidence, right? I mean, it hasn't been unearthed yet that there is a lost civilization that on the scale and, that he's talking about. He's looking at trace evidence and trying to bring things together to, into a thesis about, some anomalous pieces of our history. And he's come up with a narrative about it. And he could very well be wrong about it. And I'm prepared to accept it. He could also be onto something. Who knows what they're going to find with these LiDAR surveys of the Amazon and further exploration of the continental shelves under the ocean. But, as it stands right now, he could be wrong. In fact, he probably is wrong about some of the specifics. But he's also right. He's also right about the fact that there are mysterious elements of our past, things that are unexplained, things like Göbekli Tepe. Despite what people say, Göbekli Tepe is not settled. It is not especially because now that they're finding structures of probably similar age, if not older, around Göbekli Tepe, and archaeology and history is going to have to account for that. Anthropology is going to have to account for that. The standard narrative, as it is right now, they are trying to incorporate Göbekli Tepe into the narrative, but it's pretty obvious they're struggling, right? It's pretty obvious that Göbekli Tepe was a shot across the bow, that archaeology and the understanding of the development of human civilization, as understood by mainstream academia, has some holes in it. So Graham is absolutely right about that. What that turns out to be, I don't know. Graham may have some things to say. He could be right, he could be wrong, but I will tell you, there are holes in the mainstream version of academic history when it comes to understanding our past. Graham is also correct, I would say, in his criticism that archaeology and various academic disciplines can get as much in their own way of finding the truth as actually finding the truth. Graham is absolutely correct when he talks about how the Clovis First Doctrine locked North American archaeology into a stale state for 50 years and really obstructed the understanding of the Americas. The same is true by doctrines and ideologies about the Amazon. For years and years and years, I heard it in my intro to archaeology classes that there's no way that there could be civilizations in the Amazon because the soils, they couldn't feed people. And so nothing more than hunter-gatherers could ever live in the Amazon. Well, we're finding out that is absolutely not true. And it's not true in a big way. In fact, they are now estimating there were tens of millions of people that lived in the Amazon that were very likely wiped out when the initial conquistadors came into South America and brought smallpox and other diseases with them and wiped out the population. And we are now finding the remnants of that lost civilization, because it is a lost civilization, friends. We know nothing about the people necessarily that built these cities that we know exist. We have the evidence. That by definition is a lost civilization. So Graham is right that academia should not get too high on its horse and proclaim what is right and what is wrong, because as we have seen, especially in the last 10 years, academia is wrong as often as it is right. And I think that Graham provides a valuable service. He provides a service of a check to archaeology saying, are you sure you know this? Because I got to tell you, there's this in the world, and 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 this in the world. That doesn't fit into the narrative that you're selling. One of the things, actually, I sat down with an archaeologist recently over dinner, and we were having a discussion about the Ancient Apocalypse show, and she's done field work in various places, Italy, etc., and she'd never even heard of Göbekli Tepe. I had to tell her what it was all about, and her eyes got as big as saucers when I told her the history of Göbekli Tepe. We see when Graham debated Zahi Hawass about 10 years ago, he's an Egyptologist, but so obviously Egypt is his focus. But he had no idea about Göbekli Tepe. And the fact that Göbekli Tepe is a game changer in our understanding as human civilization, but these are people who are experts in the field of archaeology and neighboring disciplines in literally neighboring geographies around the world, and have no idea about this game changer of a site, which is likely gain multiple sites. That tells me that academia doesn't know everything. Mainstream academia doesn't know everything. And certainly when I listen to the criticisms of Graham by John Hoops, for instance, from the University of Kansas, is one example. He's accused Graham as not talking about science, but of metaphysics. He's somehow tying Graham into the Atlantis myths of Madame Blavatsky and the Theosophical Society in a way that, I mean, he says he's followed Graham, but I see very little of what Graham is actually arguing in what he says Graham is arguing. In fact, Graham wasn't into any of the spiritual stuff when he wrote Fingerprints of the Gods. Quite the contrary, in fact. So I don't think that argument of John Hoops holds water, and neither does the white supremacist thing. I've seen this in a few different quarters where they tried to paint Graham as a white supremacist. Okay, well, Graham has come out and said it now, so I'll say it. His wife is, I'm not exactly sure where she's from, if she's from Sri Lanka or from India. I'm not sure exactly. And they're married, and Graham has 7 mixed race children. So to accuse Graham of being a white supremacist and saying that his theories are all about white supremacists, reinventing white supremacist arguments, you know, from the 19th century, that's baloney. That it doesn't hold water at all. In fact, some people are actually arguing Graham is so dangerous that he has a role to play. He has a role to play and should be apologizing for his role to play in things like the Sandy Hook school massacre, because Graham is a contrarian and he asks questions and, you know, doesn't accept official narratives of certain things. Some people are actually trying to tie Graham into like the Alex Jones stories and conspiracy theorists and all this. And when people say that, you've lost me, because like I said, if you say you've been following Graham for 30 years and that's the argument you come out with, you've missed something along the way, because that Graham has nothing to do with Sandy Hook, and nor would Graham come out with anything remotely like that. If you think Graham has a responsibility to bear that, in relation to that, you don't know Graham and you don't know his work. That's it. I don't know Graham on a personal level, but I know a lot about his opinions and thoughts on everything from government and peace and love. And he's an old hippie. He's a member of the contrarian left from the old hippie days. He's not an alt-right conspiracy theorist, right? That's not who he is. He's actually way of hell on the other side of the spectrum, but we can talk about that. He's a contrarian hippie. He's on the far left. He's an anarchist in terms of stick it to the man, and everything that people were talking about during the Vietnam War protests and civil rights movements, that's Graham. That's Graham. And so that's where, you know, a lot of this contrarian piece about academic authority, that's where it comes from. It doesn't come from the Alex Jones schools of alt-right conspiracy theories. Quite the opposite. So Graham is wrong, but he's probably also right.